Hi everyone, Stepan here. Today we're going to talk about Technique in Chess, a book by Artur Yusupov and Mark Dvoretsky. Really a book by Artur Yusupov using Mark Dvoretsky's materials. Since Mark Dvoretsky has passed away, Yusupov, who is his most famous student, has been going through Dvoretsky's material with Dvoretsky's son, and he managed to come up with a lot of things. One of them is Technique in Chess. So Technique in Chess is Dvoretsky's notes, Dvoretsky's material, and parts of his other books compiled into a book on endgame technique mostly, but also middle game technique, and most importantly, how to convert an advantage. I think a more proper name for the book would have been How to Convert Winning Positions, although it's an ugly name. Technique in Chess sounds cooler. But in short, this is a very small, very practical book that focuses on one thing alone, not messing up winning positions. If you compare it to, let's say, Dvoretsky's endgame manual, Technique in Chess is, you could call it a light read. Let's say Jesus de la Villa's 100 endgames you must know is also way thicker than Technique in Chess. So it's a light read, but it's essentially a workbook. So just like every other book by Mark Dvoretsky, and just like Yusupov's series, both the orange, blue, and green series, Technique in Chess focuses on developing a skill, not theoretical knowledge that's going to be useless over the board. Now let's talk about the book. It's divided into two parts, first of all. Part one is the theoretical part, and what I enjoy most about chess books, if I'm going to be honest. So in part one, you have how many? Probably 12 or so chapters, each on a specific strategic theme, and very similarly structured to Shereshevsky's endgame technique. So you have, for example, the concept of technique, endgame technique, and realizing an advantage, time management, realizing a material advantage, general principles of the endgame, do not hurry, which you can also find in Shereshevsky, the principle of two weaknesses as well, correct exchanging, concrete play in realizing an advantage. So each of these chapters begins with a very nice introduction. And I'm not sure whether all the notes were Dvoretsky's. I doubt that. I think most of them were by Artur Yusupov when he was compiling the material. But each chapter gives, albeit brief, a very, very useful introduction to the topic and a couple of games or a couple of positions you can go through. So, for example, the concept of technique. I'll just read a short paragraph. Generally speaking, it's understood to mean the totality of the standard procedures of the game of chess. The more such procedures a chess player masters, the more confidently he or she can orient himself or herself in the various game situations that occur on the chessboard. In doing so, he lets himself be prompted by decisions that were made in similar situations by great masters in the past and present. So, and Zaitsev says technique is an art from the past. So, technique, the concept of technique is being able to recognize patterns you've seen before. In short, now this is just the first chapter, and then he goes over a game by Tukmakov, which was really nice. He goes over Tal Cheshkovsky. I'm sorry for the pronunciation. And in these brief few pages, you get an introduction to the concept Dvoretsky and Yusupov are trying to explain. The main body of the book are the exercises. And as I said, it's a workbook. What you do get in the first 40 or so pages with the introduction to the concepts is great. But I have to say it's far less useful than part two of the book, which is the exercises themselves. So on page 41, the exercises begin. Pom, pom, pom. There are 102 exercises, and the great thing is they aren't divided by theme the same way the first 40 pages have been divided. So you don't get that easy thing where, okay, now you're looking for something with exchanging pieces, find the correct exchange. No, they aren't, in fact, themed at all. I'm going to show you one. This is a very nice position, or at least it was for me. It's white to play. What would you do as white? It's obviously two rooks against the queen, and white is technically up in exchange, but black has all these very dangerous pawns, and most importantly, e2 is attacked, and the pawn on e3 provides a great outpost for the black rook on d2. Now, when I was first analyzing this position, I was tempted to just go rook c8, but if you look at the solution, I did solve it on my second attempt, but I didn't get all the variations correct. So this is Korchnoi 7, played in Riga 1970. And Dvoretsky says the exchange of rooks lets the advantage slip. So rook c8 is given a question mark. Rook c8 is given a question mark, and he says if rook c8, then rook takes c8. Queen takes c8 check, and bishop f8 lets the advantage slip, and black has equalized. Okay. So what do we do instead? If you go back to the game, it's really not clear how white could make progress. Dvoretsky goes on to say that you could conceivably simply play the move king f3. But on king f3, he says the simple king f3 can be played, but then the opponent would reply rook d2 exclam, when black could offer fierce resistance. Okay, I mean, and it makes sense. Now if the bishop moves away, the rooks are protected, the rooks are connected. On rook c8, you don't even have to react, and these pawns are ready to move forward. Okay, and then he says Viktor Korchnoi decides the game immediately. Queen h4. Look at this move, sacrificing the e2 pawn with check. The rook is attacked, and so the rook on d8 is attacked. And there follows the double attack with queen g4 check on rook d7. So if rook d7, queen g4 check, and the rook falls. So you cannot go rook d7. The game continued, rook takes e2 check. Okay, no big deal, king f3. You could play rook f2 check, I guess. I don't know why that wasn't played. And the game continued, bishop e7. Queen takes e7, and black resigned. So it's a very interesting position where, you could take the safe approach and try to exchange rooks. You could, sorry, the rook is on b8. You could try to infiltrate somehow with the queen. It's very tempting to do something active. And noticing that this rook is stuck, and noticing that you don't have to defend your e2 pawn was, at least for me, tough. So the annotations, I hope you can see something here. The annotations are good, but not detailed. And that's the only thing I don't like about the book. So they of course explain the main ideas, as is always the case. But for example, I would like to know what happens if in this case, on king f3, black plays rook f2. Okay, I mean, sure, you can take the pawn on e3, but I think that's a variation where a lesser player than Dvoretsky and Yusupov, and especially beginners, would struggle to understand everything. So 102 exercises, and I'll just show you what Yusupov wrote in the introduction. So what exactly should you do is your own decision. And I like that part the most. Prevent counterplay, calmly strengthen the position, or force the game. And I think that's why the exercises are very good. So going back to the to the chapters and the difficulty of the book. So obviously the first 40 pages are pretty simple. It's very easy to understand all the concepts. For example, playing for the attack. When we have more pieces than our opponent, the strategy consists of playing for the attack. Since we have more pieces, our opponent is forced to defend against greater force. Often, however, we can simply attack a point with more pieces than the defense has available to defend it. And he gives a game between Smyslov and Botvinnik, 1954. I can set it up over the board. Okay, so this is the game Smyslov-Botvinnik. And Yusupov says, or Dvoretsky says, excuse me, although black has 3 pawns for the piece, his position is difficult. So what do we have here? We have 2 bishops against 3 pawns. And I don't really understand the sentence, although black has 3 pawns for the piece, his position is difficult. I mean, black should be worse here, simply because being a piece down, if you want to listen to someone like Ben Feingold. So it's basically this light squared bishop for 3 pawns, call it these 3 pawns, and this bishop isn't active for now, and we have to find a way to activate it and to start attacking. Smyslov could have decided the contest in the middle game if he had destroyed his opponent's pawn chain and opened lines for his pieces with h2, h3. I like that plan, and when I was going through the book, I didn't really have time to think about the position because I had read that sentence immediately, but I like to think that I would have found h3 on my own. And then the book goes on to say queen g2 exclam. Okay, threatening rook e5. I mean, it's simple attack on d5. Black played rook f8. And now h3 would have won. Which is funny. I mean, why don't you take? That's pretty why don't you take on d5? That was my question. But in the game, instead of queen g2, he played queen e6 check. Sorry, the rook is an f8. Queen e6 check, queen takes e6, rook takes e6. And Dvoretsky says, normally a piece exchange is the simplest path in converting a superiority in material, but in the first place, what we see here is in formal terms material equality, but what is more important is a second consideration, that fewer pieces remain on the board so that the pawns take on a greater significance. And I like that sentence a lot, and you get a lot of gems like that throughout the book. So many beginner players don't know these concepts, but if you're up a piece for pawns, the pawns become more significant as you trade pieces down. And that's why the introductory chapters are really useful. Not that they prepare you for everything you're about to solve in the 102 exercises, but they do a lot. Now, difficulty. I think that this book is great for anyone who has a FIDE rating and who plays tournament chess. People ask me all the time, the ratings on Chessreads, are they FIDE, are they USCF, are they online? Everything above 1400 is a FIDE rating. So I think anyone who actually has a FIDE rating and plays tournaments would benefit from this book a lot and would understand everything. Whether a 1500 rated player would be able to solve all the problems, now that's a different story. Okay, I don't think they would. I didn't solve all of them correctly, and I struggled to solve quite a few, even partially. That being said, the first 40 pages of the book are really, really useful. In about 40 pages and 50 or so positions, you are introduced to about 20 concepts that are essential knowledge to navigate complex endgames and to convert advantages. So I think this book is suitable for almost everyone. Even if you don't play tournament chess, even if you're 1500 chess.com or Lichess, it's still going to be useful. Now, how should you go through the book? I would say that you need to set up all the positions over a real board and solve them. That's the main body of the book, and that's the biggest benefit. If you fail, go through the solution and then solve the position again. Of course, you will know the correct solution, but you will reinforce the knowledge you've read in the book. In short, technique in chess is, it takes about 2 days to go through it if you solve all the exercises. And if you're a diligent chess player, it's a good book. It's not at the level of Dvoretsky's other works, or for that matter, Yusupov's, but you really cannot compare it to the rest. Comparing, I don't know, Jesus de la Villa, Endgame Manual, and this, it cannot be done. So this is a book on converting advantages, and it covers the middle game and the end game. You could also say it covers the opening, but it's going to teach you how to save points and how not to allow counterplay when you're better.